Welcome to the second session of provider live streaming. So really want to encourage people to send us any questions that they have about system transformation. So you can do two things. You can enter it into the screen that you've got where you're watching this, or you can send us an email to stfeedback@moh.govt.nz. Just before we start answering questions, I just wanted to give you a quick update on where we are in terms of things for providers. So firstly, we will be sending a letter to all providers in Mid-Central by the end of June, which talks about what's going to happen in Mid-Central and the timing and proposed process for contract variation. So it will start to give you the information about what it will mean for you as an individual contract, as an individual provider. We will also then follow up with another letter in July that gives further detail of the timing and exactly what will happen for each particular service line. The first phase of contract discussions will start in July, the second phase in October, and the third phase early in 2019. So really just want to emphasise that this is not everything's going to be in place on the 1st of October. We are working through those discussions and negotiations with individual providers over a period of time. So most importantly, we're really wanting to encourage providers to start working differently from the 1st of October. So what are we trying to achieve in this? We really want providers to be starting to understand more about what do the disabled people who use their support want from their support. So really trying to understand what are disabled people in whānau goals and aspirations? What are they looking for in terms of from support? And what could you do to make the support you provide more relevant and useful for them? We want you to be starting to think about now, not just after the 1st of October, how are you working with your workforce to ensure that they understand the EGL vision and principles and how to apply those principles. And we are going to be starting to do engagement, and we're doing some work with providers and the representatives of workforce, the unions, to look at what we could do to support people to have those conversations in individual workplaces. Most importantly though, what are the three things we're really wanting from the 1st of October? That disabled people in whānau have more support options, more flexible, tailored to what they're trying to achieve. So we really want you to be thinking about what can you do to make the support you're providing, no matter what it is, more flexible and more able to be tailored to what an individual disabled person or whānau wants. The other thing is about how can you support disabled people in whānau to make more decisions over their support. And that will be different depending on what type of support you're providing and also where disabled people and families are. For some people it's going to take a while and they will need to start making smaller decisions before they will be able to move to making bigger decisions. And some people will need support for decision making. And that is something that from the 1st of October we'll be looking at. We will have ways of putting support in place for individual disabled people and families. So we've talked about what you can do now to get prepared, but the other things are participate in sessions like this, ask the questions you want to know and keep updated on what's happening. Talk to people in the Mid-Central provider group to share ideas and contribute to the implementation of the prototype. We are about to start the procurement process for a provider umbrella group to be able to do capability building for providers in Mid-Central, and we'll be communicating with you over the next month or so the opportunities to be involved in that. That will probably actually be, I'm probably being a bit ambitious, it'll probably be from the beginning of August. Also start engaging with your staff around the EGL vision and principles, and as I said, we're working with unions to be able to develop some supporting materials. Also from the beginning of July, I suggest that you start talking to your contract relationship managers about what you're thinking and what support you need. So that's an update. The other thing I just wanted to let you know too is we're starting to communicate with individual disabled people in whānau in the region, and we will be sending out the first letter to each individual who currently accesses support in Mid-Central region from the beginning of July. That will also be available on the website at that time so that you can see what has gone out to disabled people in whānau, and there will also be some supporting information, for example, frequently asked questions with it. So after that update, I will start answering questions. So we had a question from Mike. What advice do you have for us to adapt as providers in other areas in Mid-Central? So I've sort of talked a little bit about that, but I really just want to again reiterate, what we want you to do is to start thinking and listening and asking disabled people and families, what are they looking for from you? What support options do they want? What would make a difference to supporting them to be able to build on their strengths and their aspirations? Secondly, they're talking about the Enabling Good Lives principles and how you can incorporate those into your practices. How do you encourage disabled people and families to be able to make more decisions in the support that they're provided? So starting to think about how you increase decision making for disabled people and families. I've had a question from David. If a pay equity uplift is applied across the board to personal budgets, will people employing self-employed contractors as support workers need to pay equity rates as a minimum, or are they exempt from this legislation as self-employed contractors, even though the budgets they have had the uplift? That is a very technical question. I think the bit I would start with is to say that one of the requirements will be for disabled people and families, no matter what arrangements they have in place to manage the money, that they have to meet all legal obligations. So where there is a legal obligation to pay a pay equity rate, they will need to meet that requirement. We will have to do some work to work through exactly what that means in terms of how funding allocations are made, and that's part of the work that we're just finalising at the moment, the funding processes and what that will look like for every bit, which includes making sure that we've covered off funding for all legal obligations. This is also an area that we have had a lot of feedback from the workforce representatives about. And so we've got a workforce working group that is working on a number of the issues around the types of employment relationships, what will we need to do to support disabled people in whānau to understand their legal obligations and to be able to understand what best practice looks like. And that working group is meeting monthly, next meeting on the 3rd of July, and we're specifically looking at some of those, the bits about understanding what are the types of arrangements that will be in the prototype from an employment perspective, employment, contracting, COHA reimbursement, and also understanding what all of the legal obligations are. Welcome to everybody who has just joined us. Just really encouraging you to you could answer the questions for me, that would be great, but really encouraging you to ask questions. This is your opportunity to ask anything that you would like about the prototype and what it means for providers. Can't promise you I can answer everything, but what I can do is if I can't answer specifically, we'll either be building it into the work we're doing or we'll provide an answer after this. So I've had a question from Marie. How will you make sure that the connectors won't be biased and encourage disabled people to access supports from providers the connector likes? So one of the key things for the connectors is to be objective and impartial. And one thing that we will be doing in August or September, I'm not 100% sure on the timing at this point, we'll be going to providers and asking them to provide information about the support they provide in their own words and testimonials from disabled people or whānau who use their support if they wish. And that will be available on the website. So one of the things we will have is the opportunity for providers to be really clear about what they do and don't offer. The other thing is that obviously the training for connectors will be about the need to provide impartial, informed information to disabled people in whānau to make the decisions themselves. And that will be some of the things that we will be including in their performance measures and in induction and coaching and ongoing development of connectors. It'll also be something that we will be monitoring feedback from disabled people and families if they feel that there has been a situation where a connector has particularly pushed a particular type of support, that there will be a way for that feedback to come back to us and for the director or manager to look into that and to make sure that that doesn't happen. I've had a inquiry from email. Sorry, I've just joined and wondering when will we be able to know what our contracts look like. So at the start, I talked about that we're going to have a letter going out to providers by the end of June to each of the providers in Mid Central, which will talk to you about the overall process and the timing. But there will be 3 phases of negotiation around contracts. The first phase in July, starting from July, the second phase starting from October, and the third phase starting early next year. I've just had an email from David via email. Do we have draft EGL system transformation purchasing guidelines available now? If not, what can you tell us? That's part of the information that is going to Cabinet in terms of the funding processes. So we will be seeking decisions on that at the end of July. We have got some information at a high level on purchasing guidelines or purchasing guidance. And one of the things we're trying to achieve there is to make it as few rules as possible, but one of the ones that there will be a very strong focus on is meeting all legal obligations. And that's one of the things that we're working with the workforce working group, is to work through, we'll have a line of a line in the purchasing guidance that says that you need to meet all legislative obligations, but then having detail about what those are. And remember, disabled people and families don't need to manage all of this themselves. They will have options about how they manage the money. So they might choose that they want to employ disabled people. They might choose they want to negotiate with providers. They might choose they want to use a host, whether that's a disability host or a mainstream provider, and they can choose to use the existing contracting mechanisms where the Ministry of Health continues to contract on their behalf. Katie, if I'm in a residential service, can I offer respite to anyone? So that is one thing, that there will be the opportunity from the 1st of October for providers to offer new support to disabled people and families. And that might be something that disabled people and families can negotiate directly with the provider, or might be something that we look at in terms of variations to contracts. But at this point in time, I think it's more likely to be something that you can offer as a new support offering. So yes, we're definitely encouraging providers to think about providing new offerings. And what I would be suggesting is that at this stage, asking disabled people and families, what are they looking for? What would the support look like that would work for them? Just a reminder for people who've just joined us, we really want your questions, so please send them through. You can either just type them into the screen that you're looking at, or you can send them to stfeedback@moh.govt.nz. Nikki has just asked, will there be coaching for self-management available for disabled people and their families? Nikki, we are absolutely looking to be able to provide support for disabled people and whānau to be able to learn about how to manage the funding and what their obligations are. Exactly what that looks like, we're still working through. So we are looking at the possibility that might be one of the things that a contract that might be part of one of the host contracts, where you have the option to actually get coaching and support over a period of time. We will also be providing a lot of information online for people, and there will also be some capability building sessions in Mid Central for people who would like some support with that. I've just had an email that says, is there provider support planned or available for current providers that are not government contract holders, including those outside of the mid-central region? We operate the EGL principles and intend to do so for many years. However, some support would be appreciated until the national EGL rollout is realised. Absolutely understand that. So what was in the cabinet paper and is that there is funding, 500 and something thousand this year, for there to be a series of workshops around New Zealand to support disabled people, whānau, providers, iwi, to learn more about more about the EGL vision and principles, and to start getting ready for when system transformation might get to them. And so that will be an opportunity for people outside of the region to attend forums. We're just working through the procurement processes on that, so I'm imagining that will start probably from early August. We also just want to say that all of the information that will be available to the current providers in Mid-Central will also be available online. So if there are people who are not currently providers but want to, they will be able to look at what's available in terms of capability development in Mid-Central region. Just encouraging people to carry on sending us questions. Having just a few technical issues right now. I've just had an email from Rachel. Just wondering how you see this working in rural areas. Strengths and challenges. Also, will the funding provided for EGLs impact funding received for government funding agencies such as Child Development Services? So, Rachel, one of the things we're really wanting to understand through this is exactly how we can provide more flexible support options in rural areas. And one of the things we've seen in the demonstrations to date is that when you can use the funding more flexibly, there are other things that you can put in place to provide support to disabled people that builds on their strengths and enables them to achieve their aspirations. So I think there absolutely, there are some real strengths in rural areas, that there's often quite strong community connections and people are used to kind of innovating and doing things differently. And you might be able to find someone in your area who wants to provide support of a support that hasn't been available to now. Challenges, there's not a lot of established providers in some of those areas, and we really need to think about how we support people to get the workforce training to enable them to provide support for disabled people, and that those support requirements can be quite different depending on the particular needs of the person and their own what types of support they need. Will the funding impact things like child development services? We are really looking at two bits around this, which is that one, we are wanting to move the funding more to the front end, so that rather than being an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, we are actually investing in building the resilience of disabled people, or in this case children with disabilities and their whānau, by investing in an earlier stage. And one of the options for that is things like child development services and behaviour support. So we are looking at how we can put more funding into that area, and we did get 6.84 I think million for additional support within the prototype. The other bit is we're really, and we're just starting this work to have a different approach to how we work with children in the Mid-Central region that brings the support provided by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education closer together. So trying to provide an integrated support so that people don't have to go to different agencies for different parts of their lives. And we're starting some work with the local officials. They've had a few meetings to date, and we've got a workshop planned for the 11th of July. We're really looking for families who have had experience with the services for young children and are looking for people who would like to share their experience with us as part of that work. Had an email from Elliot. Is there any qualification, procurement or other test process for providers who want to offer support in new ways? Elliot, that is one of the things that we are still yet to answer. One of the things that we haven't been able to progress to date, and I'm expecting to, I'm committing right now that we really want to get the market shaping working group underway. So that has been, it's the final, there's 2 groups still to go. We want to bring the social investment people together to talk about where we've got to with the funding process and get their feedback on that. But we also, the one outstanding area that we want to start the working group on is market shaping, and I'm looking to have the first meeting of that by the middle of July. And in that, that's one of the questions, key questions is, do we need to make any changes to the current regulatory framework to ensure there's enough protections for disabled people in whānau and workforce where disabled people in whānau are contracting directly with providers. And that is where you might get to saying, actually for this, what we want to do is provide information to disabled people in whānau to say, hey, these providers, and this is in the information on the website, have gone through this particular assessment and we can say that they have done X, Y, Z, whether you call that accreditation or just being able to provide information about what requirements they have met. I've got a question about how you're going to monitor the funds to ensure family and whānau do not abuse the funds and thus affecting the care and welfare of the person with a disability. One of the key things we've got in this is safeguarding overall in terms of system transformation, and a key role of the connector in terms of working with the disabled person and family will be to ask those questions about what do we need to put in place to safeguard the disabled person and whānau. And that also talks about understanding who is best placed to manage the money, and what have you put in place in terms of safeguards around that. There will also be some light touch monitoring in terms of to understand patterns to make sure we can see if we think there are questions around how the funding's being used, that there will be a process in place for us to be able to follow up with the disabled person and family to understand what's going on, and depending on what the response is to that, to escalating response to be able to address where we think there are, to address issues where we think there's financial abuse. Had an email from, one other thing on that is that we have got developed a dispute resolution process, which is more than dispute resolution, and one of the things that's in there is to have a process for anybody who wants to raise a concern about a disabled person where they think they are at risk of abuse, whether that is physical or whether it's financial, so that there is a process. It isn't portable outside of the Mid-Central region. So if you are within Mid-Central, you have access to the prototype. If you move out of Mid-Central, you will transfer back to the existing system. And over time, as decisions are made, then more and more parts hopefully will be within the system. But for the prototype, and I just need to re-emphasise that no decisions have been made on rollout beyond Mid-Central, but for the prototype, you will only be able to access the Transformed Disability Support System within the Mid-Central region. I've had an email from Lachlan. If there is a dispute with a disabled person who has an individual contract, who will support the dispute process? That is one of the questions that has been raised in the workforce working group with disabled people and with unions, workforce representatives, and that is something which we are still working through in detail exactly what support would be there. But one of the things we are wanting is to have have disabled people and families having access to advocacy to support them where they do need that in relation to a third party, and that might be one of the avenues to support that. Just encouraging people to send in questions, and just to say, look, if you missed the start of this, you can watch it again online after the session. It takes a few minutes to be up, but there is the opportunity to watch it again from the start. I've had a question from Simone via email. Will the system transformation impact any contract with other government agencies, for example, Ministry of Social Development? So one of the things that we are still working through, and where Cabinet will make decisions on in early August, is on what funds come from other government agencies into the scope of system transformation, and that will include considering whether contracts from MSD for people in Mid-Central, the funding will move into the system transformation, into the prototype. So the short answer is I can't answer that question at the moment, but that is something we're working through right now. I just want to assure providers that obviously there's a need to give people notice of any changes to contracts. So there will be a period of notice prior to any changes, and that would be at least 3 months, and it would be after decisions are made by Cabinet, and that is public. David has asked me a question. Can you remind me how far along the funding allocation processes are, and the most recent update details are on this? How exactly will the amount of funding personal budget be set and calculated? So, David, this is the area that people have been most interested in. There's been a lot of work done on it, and there was testing for the virtual testing group through April and the beginning of May. We're currently working with ministers, and we'll be taking proposals for decisions at the end of July, and at that point, post the Cabinet decision, we'll be able to say exactly what has been decided and to be able to provide information on that. Just had another question from David. If a person chooses to have their services managed by a provider, for example, home and community support services, as they currently do, or opt into a fully managed service so they can direct their care but not need to manage their budget, etc., can the provider continue to claim in between travel as per the legislation and pay equity using the existing contracting mechanisms? Again, David, that's a very technical question, but what I can say is that in terms of either a disabled person and family negotiating directly with a provider, or with the funder negotiating, so the funder in this case being the Ministry of Health negotiating with the provider, we will need to meet all legal obligations, including in between travel and pay equity, which is in the legislation. Just a reminder that you will get a letter, every provider in Mid-Central will get a letter by the end of June explaining what we're looking for providers to do and what the timeframes are going to be for making changes to contracts. Somebody has commented, we believe that the connectors will also come under the Health Disability Commission legislation, so this would ensure more accountability and reassurance for disabled people. Is this correct? That is, thank you for that. That's a really useful question. I don't actually know the answer to that, and that is something we will follow up on. And it is something that could quite possibly be correct, so we'll just make sure and follow that up. So thank you very much for that observation. So we're at 10:29, so I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who sent in questions. Reminder that we will be sending out letters to everyone who is a provider in Mid-Central by the end of June. And once again, thanks for your patience in terms of information. We are trying to get you as much as we can, but there is still a lot of work underway. Thanks.